Have you ever pondered what prevents you from being truly happy? Drawing from Good Will Hunting, one could argue that psychological constraints are a significant barrier. This is part 3 of a series of 5 films directed by Gus Van Sant. Everyone possesses psychological constraints. To name a few, fears of failure or rejection, limiting beliefs about oneself, procrastination, perfectionism, and negative thinking patterns resulting from past traumas. These constraints are intrinsic parts of the human experience. Recognizing these constraints is usually easier than changing them, as altering deep-seated mental and emotional patterns can be challenging. How individuals address and manage these psychological constraints shapes their identity and influences their daily lives. The notion that psychological constraints profoundly affect our well-being and the quality of our lives finds support in various psychological and philosophical theories. These constraints can shape our perception of the world, influence our decision-making, and affect our interactions with others, potentially fostering behavior patterns that hinder our pursuit of happiness and fulfillment. Movies, with their metaphorical richness, offer a unique lens through which to explore human psychology and behavior. When I first saw Good Will Hunting, I perceived it as a celebration of the magic, power, and glory of talent. Yet, upon rewatching it years later, the themes of human connection, friendship, and love took center stage, surpassing the importance of talent. 3 months ago, another viewing brought me to the realization that at its core, the story confronts psychological constraints and how they can unconsciously govern and structure our behavior if we don't actively confront them. Indeed, a myriad of factors beyond psychological constraints can impede happiness, including poverty, illness, political or other forms of oppression, war, etc. Many films have addressed these issues. However, Good Will Hunting zeroes in on the realm of psychological barriers.
What do you want to do? You and your bullshit. You got a bullshit answer for everybody. But I ask you a very simple question, and you can't give me a straight answer. Because you don't know. See you, Bo Peep. Fuck you. You're the shepherd.
Do you understand what Sean is addressing? If you've ever felt hindered from pursuing what truly matters to you because you're unsure of your desires or what you genuinely want, then you likely grasp Will's predicament in this moment. Good Will Hunting features a clearly defined structure where Will Hunting's connections with each of the other central protagonists symbolize crucial steps toward liberating himself from the shackles of his psychological constraints. Will and Professor Lambeau bond through their shared genius in mathematics, but overcoming psychological constraints requires more than intellect. It demands emotional understanding and support. Will and Chuckie bond through their deep friendship and loyalty, but overcoming psychological constraints needs more than camaraderie. It demands confronting one's fears and embracing vulnerability. Will and Skylar bond through their mutual love and passion, but overcoming psychological constraints goes beyond romance. It demands openness and emotional honesty. Will and Sean bond through their shared experiences and backgrounds, but overcoming psychological constraints requires more than shared history. It demands deep empathy, trust, and mutual healing. These relationships are pivotal, suggesting that, according to Good Will Hunting, they are the foundation of a fulfilling, happy life. Let's start with Will Hunting possesses a unique mathematical talent, potentially making him one of the most brilliant minds in the history of mathematics. However, this talent does not help him cope with everyday life issues. He struggles with profound psychological constraints stemming from his abusive past, which significantly affect his behavior, relationships, and decisions. Initially, Will uses avoidance and denial as his primary mechanisms for dealing with these psychological constraints, acting as if these issues do not exist. He presents himself as a strong, untroubled individual, a facade that masks his inner turmoil and fear of vulnerability. This approach leads to various negative outcomes, including conflicts with the law, difficulty in maintaining relationships, and an unwillingness to realize his intellectual and professional potential. Suggesting that merely acting as if psychological constraints do not exist is an ineffective long-term solution. Due to his conflicts with the law, Will faces imprisonment but is rescued by Professor Lambeau, who is preeminent in the field of mathematics. Lambeau, recognizing Will's talent, takes him under his wing, treating him with respect. Although initially grateful, Will soon realizes that Lambeau's interest lies in his talent rather than in his personhood. Lambeau treats everyone as a means to an end, living mainly for mathematics and the fame that comes with mathematical achievements. At first glance, the professor seems to be completely in control. However, when Lambeau fails to manipulate and control Will, his psychological constraints become visible. Lambeau's identity and self-esteem are closely tied to his status as an MIT professor and mathematician. This is a common trait among individuals who have achieved significant success in their field. Their self-worth becomes entangled with their professional achievements, a psychological constraint in itself. Lambeau's desire to remain at the pinnacle manifests in his interactions, especially with Will and his subordinates. When Will, the student, outshines Lambeau, the teacher, the professor faces a challenge to his intellectual superiority by a young, seemingly carefree individual. Moreover, Will's indifference to the accolades and opportunities that Lambeau values so highly exposes the fragility of Lambeau's self-image. Professor Lambeau is a slave to his self-image and ambitions. When his efforts with Will fail, it not only threatens his self-perception as a control wielder, but also forces him to confront the limits of his influence and the conditional nature of his self-esteem. In this context, Will and Professor Lambeau share similarities. Both employ facades to appear in control, using their intellect and status to mask their psychological constraints. Will portrays a facade of strength and Lambeau of success, both concealing their true selves.
I knew you before you were a mathematical god. When you were pimple-faced and homesick and didn't know what side of the bed to piss on.
Yeah, you were smarter than me then, and you're smarter than me now, so don't blame me for how your life turned out. It's not my fault.
I don't blame you! It's not about you, you mathematical dick!
The relationship between Will and Professor Lambeau illustrates that overcoming psychological constraints requires more than just intellect. It requires emotional understanding and support. The friendship between Will and Chuckie highlights a significant theme: the power of deep, trusting relationships in fostering personal growth. Will completely trusts his best friend Chuckie, serving as a testament to Chuckie's positive influence on him. Chuckie and the gang are not just his friends. They are the loving and caring family he never had. To him, they are more important than mathematics or love. They are real and reliable. Exactly what he needs most in his life. But Chuckie and Will are also best friends because they complement each other. Chuckie's down-to-earth, straightforward life approach, as opposed to Will's complex intellectual nature, creates a dynamic where they can learn from and support each other. This notion aligns with the idea that friendships often thrive on differences, allowing individuals to grow and challenge their perspectives. Having never had a friend like Chuckie, Will is extremely loyal to him. Will would go through hell for Chuckie. When Chuckie discovers that Will would give up everything just to be like his pals, Chuckie tells him, as a true friend, that nothing in the world he wishes more for Will than to start something meaningful with his life.
You got something none of us. Oh, come on. Why is it always this? I mean, I fucking owe it to myself to do this or that. What if I don't want to?
No. Fuck you. You don't owe it to yourself. You owe it to me.
Because tomorrow I'm gonna wake up and I'll be 50. And I'll still be doing this shit. That's all right, that's fine.
This conversation marks a turning point for Will. Without his best friend's guidance, Will would never find the strength to pull himself together and venture into the unknown. By juxtaposing Chuckie's authenticity with Will's initial facade, the film showcases how each character addresses their psychological constraints. Chuckie has learned to cope with his psychological pressures. He accepts his limitations and constraints and thus finds his authentic self. His example indirectly motivates Will to confront his own issues. The friendship between Chuckie and Will emphasizes the crucial importance of genuine human connections in overcoming psychological barriers. From Will's perspective, the dilemma with true love is that one cannot experience it without being completely open and vulnerable. And this is exactly what Will is incapable of. He is reluctant to let anyone, especially Skylar, see what exists beyond his facade. Hidden behind his facade are his weaknesses, shame, pain, and anger. He has meticulously crafted his entire persona to appear as the antithesis of his true self. Will's greatest fear is that Skylar is actually attracted to the facade he has constructed and that upon discovering what lies beneath, she will abandon him, bringing him even more pain into his life. He of course doesn't want this. The tangible fear of being hurt again by someone he loves is stronger than the possibility of a hoped-for happy ending. Like Chuckie and Will, Skylar and Will complement each other, but not because they are opposites, but because they are equals. Both are looking for someone they can trust, love, and spend the rest of their lives with, because it feels right to do so. The relationship between Will and Skylar illustrates how love can serve as a motivator to challenge the status quo and ultimately aid in overcoming psychological constraints. Sean and Will are soulmates, but not in a romantic or spiritual way, but in a pragmatic, materialistic manner. They come from the same neighborhood and have undergone the same cultural upbringing. Both had alcoholic fathers who abused them. Both are highly intelligent and talented. In other words, they are soulmates because they've had similar experiences, because their worlds and values overlap. They trust and respect each other because they see themselves reflected in the other. They're not physically related, yet they are closer to each other than any blood relative. They live a kind of father-son relationship as it should be from an ideal psychological perspective. Sean helps Will to face his traumas. And because Sean is metaphorically his father, Will can accept Sean's help. Will points out Sean's psychological constraints, and because Will is metaphorically his son, Sean can accept Will's criticism. One might think that Sean, as a psychologist and therapist, does not need Will's help. But he does. The entire film is about the difficulty of making one's own psychological constraints tangible and manageable. Professor Lambeau is highly intelligent, but he is unaware of his psychological constraints. Will Hunting is even more intelligent and street smart, but he is unable to deal with his psychological constraints appropriately. Sean's psychological constraints are related to his deceased wife. Like Will towards Chuckie, Sean is overly loyal to her.
If you ever disrespect my wife again, I will end you.
Sean is aware of this, but he has no desire to change, just like Will had no desire to change his life. Chuckie tells Will to start something meaningful with his life, but Sean's wife is dead. She can no longer tell him that. Will tells him that he needs to let her go and start living again.
Where's your soulmate? You want to talk about soulmates? Where is she?
Dead.
That's right, she's fucking dead. She fucking dies, and you just cash in your chips and you walk away?
Hey, at least I played a hand.
Oh, and you played a hand and you lost. You lost a big fucking hand, and some people lose a big hand like that and have the sack to ante up again.
The soulmate relationship between Sean and Will illustrates the transformative power of deeply empathetic relationships in addressing and overcoming psychological constraints. In essence, the interplay of love, friendship, and talent in Good Will Hunting underscores a crucial truth about human experience. Psychological constraints must be addressed to achieve personal fulfillment. love holds a significant place in our culture, surrounded by numerous myths and beliefs about its transformative capabilities. However, in Good Will Hunting, love alone does not prepare Will to enter into a functioning, harmonious relationship with Skylar, nor does Sean's love for his deceased wife help him deal with his grief. According to Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics, virtuous friendships are the highest good in human interaction. This theme is echoed in the friendships between Chuckie and Will, as well as between Sean and Will. However, friendship alone is not enough to empower Will to face his childhood traumas. To achieve that, he needs the professional help of a therapist. For many people, talent is the driving force behind art, science, politics, and much more. Therefore, they see talent as the pinnacle of our culture, civilization, and individual achievements. Good Will Hunting makes it clear that love, friendship, and talent play a secondary role when lives are overshadowed by psychological constraints. To truly embrace love, forge deep friendships, and realize our talents, we must first learn to navigate our psychological constraints with determination and insight.
It's not your fault. Don't fuck with me. It's not your fault.
Don't fuck with me, all right? Don't fuck with me, Sean, not you.
It's not your fault. It's not your fault.